Hello everyone, my name is John Capobianco, and I'm here to discuss my journey and my approach and the materials that I used and that are available to you to pass and achieve the Cisco DevNet Associate Exam and certification. I was actually at Cisco Live in 2019 when it was announced that Cisco was going to be retiring some of their certifications, revamping some of the certification tracks, and most exciting to me was introducing this new DevNet certification track and pillar in the certification system, meaning they were going to certify us in our abilities to work like developers through things like infrastructure as code and network automation and all of the tools and related environments that are used by people like me, by practitioners of automation in particular. But it's more than just automation. It really is a whole new approach. And there's some new key technologies that the network engineer needs to master if they're going to be successful in this field. Now, I'm a big proponent of certifications. I'll show you my history of certifications. I've been writing industry certifications since 2004. And I try to write one or two certification exams at least. Maybe not full designations, but I try to write one or two exams a year because I think it's to me personally, it's been my only way to keep up with the constant changes in technology. It's been a way to differentiate myself in the field, and it's really become the only way that I can master new technologies and really mix what I do every day in the field with book knowledge and studying and practicing and labs. Now, this exam, to me, it was one of the best exams I've ever written, and I've written quite a few exams. This is way up there. This was like the T-shoot exam, if anyone ever wrote that exam, where there's a lot of practical knowledge required. There's a lot less theory I found in the DevNet Associate than some other exams. It really is hands-on stuff that if you do every day may actually be easy for you. But if you've been a classic network engineer and have not started the transition, it's going to be difficult. It is a very wide exam. I mean, everything from, OS level things in Linux and Unix to version and source control to CI/CD pipelines to containers to automation, right down to different file format types. So it's a very wide exam. Now, my opinion, if you're going to write your very first Cisco exam, I would recommend still trying to get your CCNA first, because a big portion, I believe it's 15 or maybe 20%, 15 I think, we'll see in a second, of the DevNet Associate is foundational network knowledge. All right, so someone like me didn't necessarily need to focus my time and energy while I was studying on the network component of this exam. I still read the chapters and reviewed that information, by the way. I'm not above doing that. It's a good refresher for me. Because, it is DevNet network. A big part of this is still the network. So let's dive in to the materials that I used and my approach and the general ecosystem to hopefully give you the best chance at passing the DevNet Associate. Now, where I always start with any exam, if it's available to me on the market, if Cisco has released an official cert guide, an OCG, which they have for DevNet Associate, I start with the book and the blueprint. We'll come to the blueprint, but the blueprint's actually on the back of the book. But this is where I always start. I would not say that only the book will prepare you for this exam. Possibly, depends on your field experience, depends if you come from a software background, becomes if you're coming from a pure Windows background or if you have some Linux. It really depends on your individual skills. But as a blanket statement, I think that the book will point you to the areas that you should seek additional sources of training or materials to shore up your knowledge. And that's what I did. I read the book, and this is John's personal practice. I go over this once with a highlighter. I don't know if I pick a page. Any page, there's highlighted stuff. That's how I do it. I go through it with a highlighter. I go through it a second time and focus on my highlighted notes, any crib notes I've made, and I kind of get a mental idea of, I'm ready for this and I need a little bit more help. I'm not even close. This stuff is way beyond me, right? It gives you a good gauge, chapter by chapter, whether or not you're ready. Now let's jump into the web resources, and I'm going to just go full screen. So start on developer.cisco.com. Get an idea of what DevNet is, what it's all about, right? Discover the technologies, the communities. In particular, you're going to want to play in the sandbox. You really are going to want to spin up sandboxes and explore different technologies depending on what you use every day. These sandboxes have REST APIs, there's Yang models, there is Postman collections, there is all kinds of pre-canned automation solutions ready to go. Okay? Now, just to give you a sense of the history, this exam is still very new. It was released in February 2020, and that February 2020 was when the whole Cisco certification track was redeveloped. All right, now there's a little bit on DevNet on Wikipedia that you might want to read if you're interested in the history of DevNet. But really, this is where you should be going, is the Learning Network, DevNet Associate Exam topics, and look at this blueprint. And we're going to explore this blueprint. As I said, and I'm going to start with number 6, network fundamentals. You have to know all of these technologies listed here. I would summarize it as saying have a good comfort level with the OSI stack, with certain CLI commands, with layer 2 and layer 3, in particular, switching and routing, right? The layer 7 services. Really, a good, they call it the fundamentals, and it really is a review that you understand the fundamentals of networking. If anything on this list is unknown to you, I do not believe you're ready for this exam, right? If you don't have an idea of what DNS is, I would strongly recommend you start with the pure CCNA exam. That aside, if those 15% are old news to you and you do it day in and day out and you've done it for years or you're already a CCNA, then let's start looking at the other topics, okay? So software development and design. This is important stuff. Compare the data formats. And I just want to highlight, right, February 2020, this came out. Well, if we look at the release date of my book's, almost a year ahead, just about a year ahead of the DevNet Associate Exam. And a very, very large portion of my book talks about these data formats and talks about infrastructure automation, but we'll come to that. So there are other places that you can find, along with the materials I'm going to show you here today. My book actually covers a lot of this stuff, and, I think maybe help pave the way for the DevNet Associate. So this is an important topic. It's not all about the code necessarily. You really need to understand these different development methodologies: Agile, Lean, and Waterfall. All right? That is a very important thing. Even just outside of passing this exam, this is a very important concept for us moving forward as developers. Are the developer methodologies, obviously, right? We want to start working like developers, so we have to understand their methodologies in order to adapt them and adopt them into the world of network infrastructure and automation. Again, Git. I started with Git in my book. It was one of the key components of my book. It's one of the key components of my day-to-day life. I have my own personal repositories. I have repositories at work. I help other people with their repositories. We live in a post-Git world, okay? So really, I can't stress this enough. Understand your Git. Run over those 10 or 12 commands you have to really understand and know. It's not that hard. It's not a long list, but it's an important list. All right, so that's 15% of the exam right there. 15% of network fundamentals. If you've already got the hang of Git, and if you already know what a JSON file is versus an XML file versus a YAML file, right, you're well on your way to a pass. That's already 30% of the exam. Now, APIs. Just again, we talk about in Automate Your Network, the book, we talk about using the Ansible URI module against RESTful APIs. Now, this whole chapter here, and if you've seen any of my public work, I'm a big proponent of Postman as a tool. Well, this is 20%. 20% of the exam. REST APIs, HTTP response codes, troubleshooting problems based on that response code or the request or API documentation, identifying the parts of an HTTP response, common authentication mechanisms, different API styles, and then using Python to work with these APIs. 20%. We're up to 50% of the exam. Okay, so that's a massive topic on here. Okay, 20%. You really should be using Postman and curl and requests in Python to start working with APIs. Go to Poke API, the Pokemon API if you have to. And I'm not even joking. If you've never used a REST API and you want to pass this exam, you're going to need to find a real API that you can play with and interact with. So either go to the DevNet sandbox or start playing with some of the open and free APIs on the internet. Now, of course, this is a Cisco exam. This is the Cisco DevNet, right? So there is a lot in here to take in, and you need to take a deep breath. And this is a big topic, 15%, as much as the network foundations. So right away, Python script that uses a Cisco software development kit, given the software development kit documentation. So can you programmatically interact with an SDK and construct a Python script that will do that? Now, the other thing is that they get into the Cisco ecosystem, which is ever growing, right? This is not just Cisco Prime anymore. This is Meraki. This is DNA Center. This is ACI. This is SD-WAN and NSO, right? A big component here. WebEx Teams, WebEx Devices, Unified Communication Manager, Finesse, Firepower, Umbrella, AMP, ICE, ThreatGrid, Sandbox Code Exchange, Yang models, big part here. Apply concepts of a model-driven programmability, which means you need Yang in your toolkit in a Cisco environment. So this, to me, is where I put a lot of my time and focus. I personally felt very comfortable with sections 1 and 2, as well as the network fundamentals, which is about 50% or is 50% of the exam. I made sure that I was reading up on platforms in the Cisco portfolio, the API documentation, anything I could find in the sandbox, anything in the other learning tools I'm going to show you that focused on these platforms. I tried to spend a higher amount of my time focusing on. So that leaves 35%. One is application deployment and security. Now, This is really kind of the compute side of things, right? Edge computing is one of the topics. And then the different cloud models, private, public, hybrid, edge, and the different deployment types, VMs, bare metal, containers, CI/CD pipeline, Python unit tests, the contents of a Docker file, you using Docker images. So everything here really is the application side. And again, it might look at, say, 7% of the exam, but that's an important 7%. That might be the 7% that trips you up if you've never built a Docker container. Well, let me, go ahead, find an open source project or find how to build a Docker container on your own, because you're going to need to be able to have that skill for this exam. You're also going to need to maybe work with some of your compute people or do some homework on VMs versus bare metal versus containers. Not only understanding them, but understanding their use vis-a-vis one versus the other, and when you might want to pick one or the other. Same as the different cloud environments, right? Being a network developer now means being able to work with all of these components, not just switches and firewalls and routers, right? Speaking of firewalls, well, there is a big component on security. Secret protection. If we're going to automate things, how do we handle our secrets? A big component of Automate Your Network, my book. Encryption. How do we handle data? How do these different components, firewalls and DNS and load balancers and reverse proxies, fit into the world of application deployments? What about different threats? What about bash commands? Operating system POSIX, portable operating system interface from the Unix world commands, basic file management, directory navigation, and environment variables. And then again, the principles of DevOps practices. So, we have 20% left. That's 80% of the exam. Now, infrastructure and automation, well, this is 20%. This is the second, right, tied with APIs for the largest component of the exam. So, and it's deep. It's very deep. It's not just wide. Model-driven programmability, controller level versus device level management, network simulations and test tools. Hey, look at PyATS might be on the exam. Verl is on the exam. Benefits of CI/CD pipelines, principles of infrastructure as code, capabilities of tools such as Ansible, Puppet, Chef, NSO. Python scripts against APIs, including the ACI and DNA Center, or RESTconf. How do you write an Ansible playbook? Right? How do you write an automated bash script? How does netconf versus RESTconf queries work? Can you read a basic Yang model? Can you interpret a unified differential? Can you describe the principles and benefits of a code review process? And finally, the sequence diagram that includes API calls. So that is the deep tour of the blueprint. Now, here's something I want to show you. Under the Learning Network, there is a learning plan. All right, and they have activities. And in these activities, they have setting up your Linux environment, setting up your Windows workstation, everything here. Python, parsing JSON, introduction to XML, APIs. I'm not going to go through all of it, but there is all of this wonderful stuff here, okay, that, you need to be logged into the Learning Network. Now, speaking of the Learning Network, this is the digital-learning.cisco.com. Now, they have a free 3-day trial or this free demo of developing applications and automating workflows using Cisco platforms, the DevNet Associate. I took this course. You also get 48 learning credits for your continuing education, and you get a little badge for completing it. It's 64 hours long. It includes multiple labs and is just a wonderful self-paced resource to make sure that you're giving yourself the best chance at passing. It's a wonderful companion to the official study guide. And furthermore, when you're done this course, there is a randomized test bank of, hundreds of randomized questions that will really make sure that you're ready for the test. So I use those test questions quite often to make sure that I was consistently hitting 95, 96 and above percentage on every attempt that I made. Now let's look at YouTube resources and community resources. Now I want to make a disclaimer. I don't personally really know any of these people, but I can say that I've used their materials. I'm aware of their amazing community involvement, and I want to make you aware of these other resources on YouTube in particular. Now, they may take you, some of their links, to paid third-party services that I cannot personally vouch for. All I can vouch for is the materials they've provided are rock solid, and maybe, who knows, maybe you do need an extra help. Maybe you do need, a Pluralsight course or something. That will be up to your discretion. But let's just take a look at what I use to augment the training I've already talked about. So I started with Hank Preston's DevNet playlist on YouTube, which is incredible. And Hank is a DevNet, he's got the shirt on and everything. Hank really knows how to present material. It's very easy to absorb. It's also very relevant. These are very hands-on type videos that will give you really good ideas and give you a sense on whether or not you're ready for the exam. The other one I want to show you is Network Chuck. Now, Network Chuck is, he's got 1.4 million subscribers. He's an internet celebrity, and he's really seems like a great guy. I'd love to meet Network Chuck and have, thank him for all of his community involvement. But he has a fairly long, it's an hour-long video that's very much like this video, but it's through his lens, through his perspective, and it's really, really a solid video to watch to give you a sense on how he passed. The next person I want to mention, really this one is probably the most in-depth and comprehensive, is Nick Russo. He actually made this CSV file that has links to Pluralsight courses, DevNet resources, other free content. It's a living, breathing CSV file that the community continues to maintain and Nick maintains and has probably helped. It's a 10-week program, right? So put $30 away every week for 10 weeks. Do every tab in the 10-week program, and you'll have a pretty good chance at passing the exam, and you'll have the $300 to pass it. Okay, so this is Nick Russo. Really, really can't strongly, recommend this enough. The DevNet Associate Study Plan Excel file from Nick. Now, Data Knox, or Knox, I believe his name is Knox Hutchinson. Geez, I should have had that. Data Knox, anyway. He has really good videos. How to pass the associate, about 15 minutes long. How much Python do you need? A chapter a day challenge. DevNet Associate Exam breakdown. And he passed it. So those are great resources from the community, from Cisco, the press book, my own book, if I can put it over. It's really close, the vision that Cisco had. Now, I didn't get into Yang models per se, but almost everything else, or Meraki or WebEx or whatever, right? But the automation stuff, the CI/CD pipeline stuff, the Git stuff, all kinds of overlap between this exam and my book, actually. So I wish you the best of luck. You can feel free to reach out for me if you have any particular questions. And otherwise, hey, get studying. Start spinning up some DevNet Sandbox labs and go get your DevNet Associate. Good luck. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.